adopted as a lingua franca for the whole of Indonesia. But the other one is written by the Indonesian Association of Students in the Netherlands, and they write in Dutch. And because the fact that there is no censorship in the Netherlands, where there is censorship during the colonial era in Indonesia, it allows the Indonesians to speak more freely if they publish in the Netherlands. So because of that, many of them do. These magazines are not widespread. The number of people that have access to them are very limited, because also during that time, if you were an Indonesian, it was much safer for you to just become a civil servant. If you were in favor of the nationalist movement, you ruined your career, because nobody wants to hire a troublemaker. You cannot become a civil servant in the colonial era if you are a nationalist. So many of these leaders, like Gandhi in India, are lawyers or doctors or journalists. Going back to the three magazines that I mentioned, these three magazines come from three different organizations that all have the same goal. So in the 1920s, for Indonesian nationalist history are very important, because during that time you see a transition from ethnicity to nationality. And this is fostered by Indonesian intellectuals, first in the Netherlands, and then after their studies are completed, they return to Indonesia and spread these ideas. In Indonesia, there were very few avenues to higher education during that time, and most of the intellectuals went to the Netherlands to study. So therefore, already in 1908, you have an association called the Indisch Vereniging in Dutch. It translates into English as the Indies Association. You cannot say the Indian Association, it's the Indies Association. And later it changed into the Vereniging, or the Pendidikan Indonesia, or the Indonesian Association. And this is done in 1922, 1923. They publish a magazine called Indonesia Merdeka, which means Free Indonesia. And this shows an awareness of a desire to become more independent. Very shortly after that, many of those intellectuals who return to Indonesia, they settle in Bandung and in Surabaya, two cities on Java Island. Most of the intellectual development takes place on Java, because Java is the most densely populated island, and the outer islands are largely still very, very sparsely inhabited, and there's not much infrastructure there. Almost all schools are on Java. So therefore, the Algemene Study Club, the General Study Group, is in Bandung, founded, and they publish Indonesia Muda magazine, and the Indonesian Study Club is in Surabaya, and they publish Suluh Indonesia, and then later Suluh Rakyat Indonesia, the magazine I just mentioned. So the actions and policies of these groups were very important for the development of Indonesian nationalism, and they show clear influence of Gandhian Indian thoughts and policies. Important also is that 1 year later, you have what is very famous in Indonesia. It's called the Sumpah Pemuda, or the Indonesian Youth Pledge. And in that pledge, the youngsters of Indonesia say that they are one country, one nation, with one language. And the language is all Indonesia, the Indonesian country, the Indonesian nation, and the Indonesian language. This is an important element, because before, the problem that nationalists had is that there are so many groups and there's a very big diversity, which sometimes causes quite a lot of difficulties. So the magazine I showed during the opening there was published, this article is published in 18th of March 1931, and by the group from Surabaya, the intellectuals from Surabaya, and they discuss Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and his life and his aspirations for what he wants to achieve. Um, he is one of the most referred to or most studied foreigners for Indonesia at that time. So, of all the nationalist movements, India is the most prominent in these magazines. They also do refer to other areas. They talk about Ireland at the time, trying to struggle against the British. So a little bit about China. Also, somewhat Egypt comes. You see mentioned, but India is mentioned quite a lot. So for Indonesia, India is an extremely important example. And in that, Mahatma Gandhi is the predominant influence for Indonesians. How can I show that? Well, here in this picture, if you could see on the top right there, you see written in Dutch, because most of the Indonesian intellectuals at the time, they speak Dutch. The number of Indonesian intellectuals is very limited because Dutch did not provide good education for the Indonesian elites or for the Indonesians in general. This changes a little bit in the early 20th century when they want to recruit local workers, and therefore they have to educate those workers. But in general, the Dutch do not invest or spend their money on education, which is a big disservice to the Indonesian population. And therefore, also education becomes one of the important factors or the important goals of the Indonesian nationalists. The Beweging in India, as you can see there, but Cipto Mangunkusumo is one of the few who does receive education. He becomes a doctor. He becomes the doctor, one of the first doctors to be recruited on Java and to be trained on Java, and he then becomes one of the important national heroes of Indonesia. Of all time, actually, there are a few of them. Just like in India, there are more than one. There are quite a few important figures. He writes the Beweging in India with introduction by engineer Sukarno, and this is of course the later president Sukarno. Sukarno at the time was one of the students or one of the followers, as you could say maybe, of Cipto Mangunkusumo. Cipto Mangunkusumo and another figure that I haven't mentioned, Cokro Aminoto, were two of the major figures that on Sukarno. And how important is India? Well, as you can see, they write a whole book about the movement in India. And this is published in 1928 by the group in Bandung. So where the previous newspaper is an example of the group, the intellectuals from Surabaya, looking at India and looking at Gandhi for suggestions, or mostly to see what is going on there in India and how they can learn from that. You see this also happening in Bandung. The importance of Cipto Mangunkusumo, just to give you an idea, Indonesian nationalism is often said to start with a Javanese group in 1908 called Budi Utomo. It means Javanese, it means the noble endeavor. But actually, most scholars will question that, because Budi Utomo is to an extent a group of Javanese civil servants, lower ranked civil servants, that form a kind of a pressure group to defend their interests. It has little to do with the desire to create an independent nation. A different story is 1912, the Indische Partij, or the Indies Party. That group on the left side there is created by three important figures. The one sitting there, down there, is a Eurasian gentleman by the name of Douwes Dekker. He's the nephew, the great nephew of his more famous grandfather, the great uncle, who is one of the left-leaning intellectuals who goes to Indonesia and protests against the abuses by the Dutch in the exploitation of the Dutch and even the royal dynasties as well, actually, during of the Indonesian people. And his nephew, his great nephew, is still very active as an Indonesian nationalist. He later changes his name into Setia Budi, noble service or loyal service, and is becomes one of the national heroes of Indonesia, actually. The second person that you see there is Suwardi Suryaningrat. Ningrat is a title, is a family name of a noble. And this gentleman there is actually one of the princes of one of the four royal houses on Java Island that originally come from the Mataram dynasty. This gentleman has later becomes the Minister for Education in the Indonesian Independent Republic. And on the right side there is that same person that writes this brochure on the movement in India. This is Cipto Mangunkusumo again. So Cipto Mangunkusumo is actually extremely important because not only is he part of Budi Utomo as the group of one of the first movements of Indonesian proto-nationalism, and he is also directly connected to the Indische Partij. And this gentleman is then again one of the influencers or one of the counselors almost of of Sukarno and his group. He is very active in the study club in Bandung. So this kind of people pay attention to India. These kind of people pay attention to India. So India and Gandhi is for them important. They do not idolize Gandhi. They do respect him very deeply, and they are interested in learning from the ideas, but they also have their own thoughts because, of course, the context is different. India and Indonesia, they to an extent similar, but of course with a different context as well. So what are some of the conclusions that they draw? Well, of course, very basic is the movement of Indian national awakening begins far earlier than in Indonesia. From 1830, you have Ram Mohan Roy. I'm reluctant to speak about Indian history to a distinguished crowd of Indian scholars, but this is what Cipto Mangunkusumo writes. They also mention, of course, the All India Congress, 1885, the importance of Hume, Tilak, and then Gandhi as major figures. As I mentioned, this starts only in 1908, if you want, or maybe perhaps more accurately 1912. So therefore much later. Also, they observe that Hindu-Muslim unity is quite difficult to achieve. It is achieved at times when there is opposition towards a common enemy. Now, bear in mind that when the magazines I use are published in 1931 and 1928. So what happens after that is, of course, beyond the scope of what the knowledge that the nationalists have at the time. Cipto Mangunkusumo points out protest against the division of Bengal under Curzon. He also mentions the role and importance of Gangadhar Tilak and the Khilafat movement. The Khilafat movement as a moment where Hindu and Muslim join together, and Gandhi is there at that time as the major spiritual leader, and then becomes actually spiritually inspired, as we've heard. There's so much wisdom that we can gather from Gandhi, and he is almost as it were, a little bit drawn into politics. Not always successful, as we historians know, but definitely in Indonesia, the Indonesians in this magazine that I also showed, 1931, they recognize and they mention the importance and the tremendous contribution of Gandhi, which is for them that Gandhi has created an awareness of the masses of the exploitation that colonial rule caused, and he is responsible for them for the growth of the nationalist movement, the national movement. And of course, India is in tremendously a powerful country in the sense that it has 300 million people at that time. And the Indonesian nationalists argue that people that awaken and want freedom cannot be stopped. And it's Gandhi's contribution that he has awoken those people, the Indian people. Of course, the Indonesians want to do the same in Indonesia. It's a little bit more complicated in Indonesia because the population is smaller. And so in Indonesia, 1930, you have about 60 million, with 40 million living on Java. And this is a little map here. I'm quite fond of maps. It shows the white part here is Java. That is a different map. This would normally be colored very much orange, with a more than 200 people per square kilometer. The eastern part of Indonesia is largely, I don't want to say uninhabited, but the population of outside of Java in the census of 1930, the only reliable census we have, is 9 people per square kilometer. Whereas if you look on Java, population will be much denser. On Bali, the Hindu area, Bali and Lombok together, Lombok is more Muslim. You have 1.8 million in 1930. So Bali and Lombok, Bali especially, are very densely populated, but the other areas are not. Makassar here is also populated, but some of the areas are not. Japanese figures of 1943 state 51 million inhabitants on Java. Java population density 315 per people per square kilometer, and in the principalities, those areas of the indigenous kingdoms, the royal houses on Java, there are a few left. They're very small. Actually, even today, there is one left, the Yogyakarta House, 424 people per square kilometer. However, Indonesia is 90% rural at the time, and outside of Java, you have only that nine people per square kilometer. India, of course, is 5 times the size, maybe more. So Indonesia is not a small country, but compared to India, everything is small, mostly. So what the Indonesians try to do is they try to copy or to try to learn from Gandhi, and they like to learn from India to create a popular base for their movement. And that is quite difficult for Indonesia. I think it might have to do with the fact that in India, the spiritual leadership is very important, and that Gandhi, through his philosophy, is easier, and perhaps it comes into contact easier with the masses. Whereas in Indonesia, the nationalists are more approaching the masses with political thinking, and the education level for the masses is not as high, is not that high. So actually the Islamic groups have more success in reaching the masses, but they do not manage to quickly develop nationalism, in the sense that they are more looking at pan-Islamism. And actually, in the end, it is one of the great merits of Indonesia that they managed to group both the left-leaning as well as the right-leaning, as well as the religiously inspired, as well as the regionally based groups, all together against the common enemy, which is for them the Dutch. And I've mentioned here some groups, but I will skip that because I see that my time is running out. If we look specifically at Gandhian concepts, first concept I've selected here is non-cooperation. This concept is widely accepted by Indonesians in the late 1920s in their efforts to unite, despite disagreement by the Surabaya group of the nationalists. The Surabaya group is a little bit more in favor of working with the Dutch and learning from the Dutch in order to be able to take over. But the Surabaya group, in order to not break the collective, joins which the through Bandung and the Dutch, the Netherlands-based group to form this unified front. After Sukarno is put in jail in 1930s, 1930 exactly, the concept is largely abandoned. It's originally supported by the Indonesian Association in the Netherlands, and Indonesian writers do argue that non-cooperation was already used by the Irish in Britain before it became propagated in India in 1920s. At a later stage, the debate in Indonesia continues to be pro and contra non-cooperation. And actually, Satyagraha, the truth dimension, is largely absent in the Indonesian political discourse. However, I do want to echo what Ms. Karuna said before. Truth was also considered very much a pure value and something that was matter of factual. The Indonesians used truth to see through the political maneuvers and the political stories of the Dutch, and could very easily point out that what the Dutch were arguing was not necessarily in the interest of Indonesia. So in that sense, it is important, but it is not talked about in a political way. Swadeshi or self-reliance, this is another value. This is widely accepted in Indonesia by both the Surabaya and the Bandung group of intellectuals. And the Surabaya group is very active, especially in attempts to provide training and to a limited extent, management opportunities for the Indonesians. It's a little bit complicated to explain because, of course, as nationalists and therefore seen as troublemakers, they do not get too many opportunities to become managers. How do they do that? Well, they create, for instance, a bank that lends money to the poor in society, and in that way tries to empower their own group of poor Indonesians. They also try to create different courses where people can learn and get skills in order to become more intelligent, more skilled at dealing with modernity or modern life. So the concept this concept of Swadeshi or self-reliance is widely accepted and continues to be important in the 1930s and beyond. There are, however, also some voices stating that it is somewhat impractical. It is impossible, for instance, to produce all the things that you need by yourself. But there is value in the fact that you develop yourself, you develop your society, in that you do not depend on too much on others who can then can then manipulate you to an extent. Swaraj or Swaraya, as it's more often referred to in Indonesia, self-rule. This is again a very strong concept that you can see in the writings of Indonesians during the 1920s and 1930s. It's already emphasized by the Indische Partij in 1912 and continues to stay the main aim of Indonesian groups in the 1920s when it re-emerges, and it continues all the way up to independence in 1945. Indonesia declares independence in 1945, but actually the Dutch only let go in 1949. There's still a struggle that continues. And to an extent, you can argue that this common enemy is also to an extent responsible for the unity of the nation. So the concept is intensely promoted in 1920s. Surabaya group of intellectuals form a major political group in Indonesia later. And in 1930s, these are all based on moving to self-rule. There is some criticism again here in the sense that the final control always remains in colonial hands. So for instance, having many councillors on city councils does not give you any major authority because the governor or the leader is always a colonial representative. Ahimsa or non-violence, this concept is not explicitly promoted in Indonesia. The nationalist movement is in general non-violent and tries to achieve its means through political activities, although the communist section of nationalist movement, or the communists do not really follow that, but the nationalists do. They are non-violent, also because of large Dutch dominance and the fact that they do not manage to have that much contact with the masses. They do not have power to oppose. Um, so you can see the concept is not promoted that much. And actually, during the Japanese time, the Indonesian nationalism becomes very virulent as it is manipulated to an extent by the Japanese to work for them. In observing the Indian nationalist movement, some Indonesian authors question how this concept can be continued if the colonial authorities in India and in Indonesia as well, or in the Netherlands, Indies, refuse to let go of their privileges. So basically, they argue that at some point there will be a confrontation if there is no admittance or allowance of the colonial then independent the colonized people. Indonesian concept, actually, then more pure Indonesian, is that there is a constant emphasis on unity and compromise, and this is actually often hard and fails to an extent occasionally, but also quite successful. And this is emphasized as well in this national Pancasila philosophy, which says Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which is Javanese, and it means unity in diversity. And the concepts cater a little bit to all the sections of society, that they have belief in one God, and a just and civilized humanity, as the national, the unification, the oneness, the wholeness of Indonesia, and people guided by discussion and wisdom, and also social justice for the whole of the society. So concluding, Gandhian thoughts as an inspiration, Indonesian nationalism, and India's Gandhi, there are many similarities between India and Indonesia during the era of nationalist struggle. India is clearly ahead of Indonesia, with Indonesia then having the benefit of being able to learn from India. In the 1920s, the influence of India and Gandhi on Indonesian thinkers is extremely significant. And I do want to emphasize, for me, this is perhaps something I know because it's my research area, but these people that I mentioned, those intellectuals from the Netherlands, the Indonesians in the Netherlands, of course, the group in Surabaya and the group in Bandung, those are the nationalist leaders that emerged after the war. So there are no others. There are some others that are national, that are communist. There are some others that are Islamic. But these groups that I've talked about now, that study Gandhi, that study India, or that study India to learn from it, these are the leaders for the future of Indonesia. So therefore, the fact that these groups take Gandhi and India so significantly, and they consider India and Gandhi so significant, says a lot. It says a lot. It means that Gandhi and India are very important, because the thoughts and concepts of Gandhi and the thoughts and the concepts also promoted by Gandhi are to a large extent widely found and adopted in Indonesia at the time, in the political struggle of the Indonesians. And these have made Gandhi, it's Gandhi who has made these ideas popular all over the world. So the influence of Gandhi extends beyond only India. During the pre-independence era, Indonesian nationalists critically analyzed Gandhian thoughts, and they recognized the tremendous contribution of Gandhi in mobilizing the Indian masses, something that they themselves constantly struggle with. So the Indonesia today is based on the efforts of the Indonesian nationalists during the colonial era, and their thinking is of course influenced to a large extent by ideas and concepts that were propagated and thought of by Gandhi and Indonesian nationalists as well. So I would like to end my talk here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Frank Dhont has delivered his talk on Gandhian thoughts as inspiration, Indonesian nationalism, and India's Gandhi. Dr. Frank Dhont, you have talked on how Gandhiji inspired the world. And with the fact, we must say that Gandhiji has left a humongous and everlasting impression on everyone, pan India and all around the world, in fact. Sir, with your visual presentation, we definitely construed how Gandhiji has influenced Indonesia and Indonesians. So yours was the correlational talk from ancient times to nationalistic era and much more. Thank you very much, sir, for sparing us time from your busy schedule. Thank you, sir. Namaste, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. This is a wonderful experience to know the correlation of India and Indonesia and correlating the relation of Gandhi and Karuna and many more things. We have learned a lot from this lecture, and really you have enlightened us. And it was a privilege for us that you have joined us and you have accepted our request. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, participants, we are at the verge of end of this international webinar on revisiting Gandhian thoughts in 21st century. And for concluding remarks and formal thanks, I request Dr. Pankaj Singh, sir, the organizer of this webinar, to come forward and present his vote of thanks to the revered speakers and participants. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Manjula. Thank you for coordinating all the things during the whole day. And this is my privilege to organize this international webinar on revisiting Gandhian thoughts in 21st century. And I'm highly thankful to all the resource persons who accepted my request from India and abroad, especially starting from the morning session. I am really thankful to Professor Ravindra Kumar, ex-Vice-chancellor of IGNOU, who enlightened us in the inaugural session of our international webinar. And importantly, I am thankful to our Honorable Vice-Chancellor, Madam Professor Janak Dulariahi, ma'am, and because she gave us the opportunity to organize this international webinar, and she was happily accepted our proposal. And I'm also thankful to the registrar of the university, and I am also thankful to Professor A.N. Sharma, the guest of honor, who has delivered his words of wisdom today in an oral session. And I am also thankful to Professor Ambika Dutt Sharma, our Dean, Humanities of Social Sciences and Head of the Department of Philosophy. And he enlightened with the lecture of Making in Mahatma, Revisiting the Idea of Gandhi. Surely, Professor Ambika Dutt Sharma has, through his lecture, he revisited all the idea of Gandhi. I'm also thankful to Professor Abha Arpal, the head of the department, Pandit Ravishankar Shukla University, Udaipur, Chhattisgarh. And her lecture was on Gandhi and Itihas Drishti. She delivered her lecture on the Gandhi and Itihas Drishti, and it was a wonderful lecture again. And I'm also thankful to Professor Pantibha Pandey from Mohan Sukhadia University, Udaipur, Rajasthan. She delivered her lecture on the education policy and Gandhian Nai Talim. And she has delivered her lecture on the importance of the education and how we incorporate the basic education and Nai Talim in today's time. And I'm also thankful to our head of the Department of History, Professor B.K. Shrivastava, and who delivered a wonderful lecture and a thought-provoking lecture on गांधी का गीता विषयक विचार और आज के समय में इसकी प्रासंगिकता. and he delivered his lecture, and he just through his lecture he showed just portray a picture that how the Gita can influence the every aspect of our life, and it's really it is wonderful to hear Professor B.K. Shrivastava. And in the second international session, I am really and highly thankful to Ms. Karuna, the director of Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Center, USA, for her. She has explained very simply, and she has delivered a lecture in a very simple manner. She also mentioned that her lecture is not so scholarly, but I can say that as Gandhi was so simple, that lecture of Ms. Karuna was also that kind of lecture. I am extremely thankful to Ms. Karuna, Director Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Center, USA, and our renowned Professor Frank Dhont, Department of History, National Cheng University from Taiwan. I'm extremely thankful to Dr. Frank Dhont that who accepted our request for delivering lecture in our international webinar. I'm really thankful, and he has visited virtually twice in this month on 1st of October in our refresher course. And I'm really thankful to you, Dr. Dhont, and it was a wonderful experience, and we have a very learning experience with you. And surely in the near future, whenever we organize something like this type of academic program, we will invite you. And I hope that you will so simply you will also accept our invitation again and again. And it was really I am thankful to you, sir. Now I am also thankful to our head, Professor B.K. Shrivastava, because he has given a lot of support and lot of cooperation during organizing this webinar. And I am also thankful to our senior professor, Ashok Ahirwar, sir. And without his cooperation, it was not possible for me to organizing this wonderful international webinar. And I am also thankful to Professor D.C. Sharma, the professor of our department, and Mr. Brajendra Kumar, the guest faculty of our department. I'm also thankful to my co-convener, my friend, and my senior fellow, Dr. Sanjay Barolia, and the co-convener and the organizing secretary of this program, and who deliver also about the Gandhian morality and humanitarian religion. And he's also the man of simplicity, and without his cooperation, it was never be possible to organize such a wonderful webinar. And I am also thankful to my colleague, Dr. Preeti Anil Khandare, the co-convener and the joint secretary of this international webinar, because she is just like a sister to me, and she has provided me the unconditional support during the whole the session and all the webinar program. And I am also thankful to Miss Manjula Gaur, because Manjula Gaur is the main key. She has a key role behind this successful webinar, from organizing the Google Forms to invitation, the brochure and the certificates, whatever, in all aspect of this program. Miss Manjula, hats off to you, and I'm really and extremely thankful to her, and I'm just expressing my thanks from the core of my heart, and along with her, Swati Soni, and one more scholar. She is from Taiwan, Elsa. Elsa, I am thankful to you because you have supported me throughout my program. Thank you, Elsa. And I am also thankful to all the research scholars who are directly or indirectly supported me. And I'm also thankful to more than 800 participants all over the India and abroad who has registered, and they have joined through Google Meet and through YouTube live streaming. And I'm thankful to all the participants. And now there is one formal announcement to all the participants that the e-certificate to the resource person and e-certificate to the participant will be provided after 3 days. On 18th evening, we will provide the feedback link through email to each and